Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Women in Philanthropy, Leading the Charge to Better Our Communities. I'm Nick Centineo, Senior Investment Consultant with Manning & Peers Endowment Foundation team, and I'm very pleased to be your moderator for today's discussion. I think this is a tremendous topic for today, both timely and important for helping nonprofit organizations. Timely because for many, there's certainly been a growing interest in things like inclusion, diversity, and equity. And then important also because I think it should come as no surprise that the influence women have in philanthropy really continues to grow, not only in terms of who nonprofits are turning to for leadership, but also in terms of donors, in terms of just simply who controls money. Women are certainly a major force in philanthropy. But many nonprofits and fundraisers, I think, still have questions about how to best reach them, how to craft a message that really might resonate, or maybe even just how to cultivate the next generation of women leaders. We want to talk about all of this today. And to do that, I'm very happy to be joined by three esteemed women leaders in the Rochester nonprofit community, and I'll introduce them now. Marianne McDade Clay is the Executive Director of the Women's Foundation of Genesee Valley. She has more than 20 years of experience as a strategic planning and fund development consultant in the nonprofit sector across New York State. She served as co-chair of the Women's Foundation Grant-Making Committee since 2012 and has contributed to the foundation's administration and disbursement of more than $750,000 in grants during her tenure. Marianne is an active community leader in multiple capacities, serving in the Brighton Schools PTSA, as an active alumna of the Greater Rochester Parent Leadership Training Institute's 2013 inaugural class, and on the executive committee of Fight for Brighton. Elaine Spall, PhD, JD, is the executive director of the Center for Youth. Under her leadership, the center reaches more than 30,000 young people each year. Elaine currently, or has in the past, served on multiple committees and boards at Rochester Regional Health System, the Finger Lakes Film Board, the Rochester Monroe County Youth Council, as a trustee for the Memorial Art Gallery, and the Monroe County Legal Assistance Center. She also participates as a mentor to first-year law students in the UB Law Mentorship Program, and is a founding member of the Women's Rights National Park in Seneca Falls. And recently, Elaine received the 2019 Willow Restore the Hope Award and is granted the Athena Award in 2016. She was also named a Women of Distinction by the Rochester Business Journal in 2019. And then Gretchen Wood, CFRE, is Chief Advancement Officer and Executive Director of the Monroe County College Foundation. She oversees a comprehensive fundraising program in support of the college led by a volunteer board of 55 business and community leaders and a staff of 13 dedicated professionals. Gretchen has worked in the fundraising field for more than 20 years and holds a Master's of Public Administration degree with an emphasis on nonprofit management from SUNY Brockport and a Bachelor's of Arts degree in English and English education from Syracuse University. Gretchen serves as immediate past president of the Association of Fundraising Professionals Genesee Valley chapter and is on the board of directors of the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education Mid-Atlantic District, serving as awards co-chair. And she serves on the State University of New York Community College Chief Advancement Officers Retreat Planning Committee. She is a frequent presenter at conferences nationally and received a Rochester Business Journal Women of Excellence Award in 2019. So just a few housekeeping items to cover before we get started. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them throughout the webinar using Zoom's question box. And when we conclude today's prepared questions, we'll spend any remaining time answering questions that have been submitted. If we run short on time and are really unable to answer your questions, we will personally follow up with you after the webinar. And then for your convenience, a recording of this webinar will also be available for replay. Okay, so I think we can get started. First of all, ladies, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very glad to have you. And on our agenda today, we really wanted to cover three distinct topics. We have women as donors, causes important to women, and women as leaders. So why don't we start with women as donors? And I'm going to direct this to you, Gretchen, to sort of start us off with. but anyone should really feel free to jump in. When thinking about the importance of women donors, you can find all these statistics that really show that their importance has, I guess, increased over time. But I'm curious to know about, I guess, each of your experiences with women donors. I mean, do you see that evidence firsthand? Do you have any anecdotal stories about how you've dealt with women donors and how they like to be dealt with?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we know from the data in this field that women are increasingly decision makers when it comes to philanthropy. And so absolutely, it's important that they're as involved in the conversation as their male counterparts. At the Monroe Community College Foundation, we had for many years really wanted to have an initiative that was driven by the women of our board. And that gets back to the importance of diversity on your board. We're very, very lucky to have some phenomenal female leadership on our board. So this group of women got together and they were interested in starting a scholarship that was specifically for single parents who are head of household. And really by tapping into their networks through a series of receptions in private homes, just 1 or 2 a year, over 6 years, we've raised more than $500,000 for this scholarship and allowed us to have the opportunity to really meet with new networks of women and to learn from them and to listen about how they want to be engaged and how they want to stay engaged.
Nick, let me add some thoughts. First of all, hello, everyone. I'm looking, there's 77 participants. This is very exciting. And those of us who are social beings are missing you all. So we're happy to be together. I believe that some of my strongest and most philanthropic donors at the Center for Youth are women, and I'm certainly not going to name them because they're private to me, but they are standing by my side in large donations. And in a year when we expected maybe some shortfalls and pushbacks, actually they have been the women, my high-end women donors, the one who have said to me in advance, I'm with you. I will find a way to stay with you. And that was early on a message that was so compelling and important because it gave us the strength to go forward. Often what happens is a woman, let's say it's a couple, a woman gets interested in the work, maybe visits one of our shelters, visits a nursery, goes home and tells a story. And then the next thing you know, we've got the whole family. But growingly, increasingly, they are women, either single women, women head of households on their own, or women in business who are making those large gifts themselves. Assumptions about who's making decisions need to be dispelled, particularly in this year of disruption. There's all kinds of surprises and some really, really wonderful, good surprises by our women donors.
I'll add to that. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. What I would say is, very specifically building on both what Gretchen and Elaine had mentioned, the loyalty that we've really seen, particularly through the pandemic, of female donors has been, I think, particularly remarkable at this time. And so what you really see is this connection for female donors, not only among their peers, but also their extent of their commitment to that decision making. So they're not, in my experience, people who leave an organization or leave supporting an organization because there's a transition in leadership, which has been my more recent experience and taking over the Women's Foundation in 2019. So it's an exciting time to continue to think about stewardship around female donors and the level of engagement and the meaningful level of engagement that you can offer, including what Elaine mentioned about the idea of her donors being interested in touring spaces and seeing how programs are operating and what the need is. So it's that meaningful connection to giving that I think is so strong with female donors, and that's where I think the experience really is strengthened.
That is a good sort of transition, I guess, because when you talk about meaningful connections, I also think about how so much of fundraising has to do with networking and having those close relationships, having those close connections. And I think many of our listeners out there are probably looking for ways to broaden their network, right? And to include perhaps more women decision makers in their network. What would you suggest to our listeners who want to do that, who want to broaden their constituency to maybe include more women? How can they reach them, or where might you all start? And Elaine, why don't I direct this to you first, because since I know you know just about everyone.
Well, thank you. We know that women are relational beings. That's what we know. And we know that good, strong relation. I love what Moran said about loyalty and really resilience and persistence and not walking away during hard times. Women, the fierce women that I know who are donors and supporters, run into the flames with me. And that's what they've done. They've run into this, obviously not in person, but said, I'm not walking away. We're opening new shelters. We're actually opening a new shelter in the midst of this. And the donations for that shelter are larger than ever. They're coming in, yesterday, a very, very large check from someone who said, you need me now more than ever. But it's relational. She knows the work. She knows and we talk about stewardship, my promises to her and my honor in having her stand by my side. We mustn't assume that because people have wealth, they don't care about the little details. And I think we make mistakes when we think we know people and what they care about. And honestly, many, many, many of my donors really want to see firsthand. They want to meet. They want to hear. We keep our young people private, of course. They don't know them by name, but they know their stories. And those stories do make a difference. And from all the women I know, when we can tell a story, and it really is a level of empathy, a level of trust, and a level of relationship, the dollars do come in. And I think more than ever, they have said to me, I don't want you're worrying about enough right now. I don't want you to worry about the money. That's been really the message.
When people ask me about how to expand their the women on their board, or even their board in general, I think it comes back to exactly what Elaine and Moran have been talking about. It's about relationships, and never has that been more important than now during this crisis, obviously, but even before that, in order to engage new people to our institution and to our mission, it's really about the people that we're close to being willing to say, this has been a really positive experience for me. This has been somewhere I've felt I've made an impact. And this is something that I invite you to come and learn a little bit more about. And so it's a lot of really taking the long view and having these conversations, because it's not about me just calling someone up and saying, hey, I'd really like you to be on my board or a donor. It really is so much about relationships and trust and being, having transparency.
And to Gretchen's earlier point, when she talked about diversity on the board, it's also about creating the opportunities for relationship development. So if you're looking at networking, the Women's Foundation is a little bit different from my peers on the panel today, because we're so focused on that. But specifically, when you're really thinking about creating opportunities for that, you need to have that perspective at your leadership level, on your board level, at your staff level. Are people thinking about engagement and connections to community that would be attractive or of interest to the female target group that you're looking at? So there's some just very natural research connections and then relationship development, because what you will find is that if you're creating rewarding and meaningful engagement spaces, people do bring their peers, and that peer-to-peer, you go back to the loyalty idea of the female donor, that peer-to-peer networking, which we've heard so much about, particularly during the pandemic, is even stronger when you've actually put a little bit of thought into how you're engaging those donors or connecting them to your cause.
Yeah, one of the keys we talked about, we talk about just in general when we're starting to think about how to build an effective fundraising program, is really the ability to align the passion of your audience with your organization's cause. Right, because essentially you're trying to find common ground, something that really resonates with people. I guess the question here in relation to causes that are important to women, are there some causes that you feel resonate more with women, or are we just really making bad assumptions about what we think women care about? Marianne, I'd like to throw this one to you first, because I know your work with the your work with the Women's Foundation. I know specifically it deals with causes that are important to women. So I'd like to get your perspective.
Well, and thank you, Nick. I'll make a connection directly to the pandemic. You know, one of the things we did early on was really understanding that the majority of the target population that we serve, which are female single heads of households that are suffering from, you know, being economically disadvantaged, lower level income earning and things like that. They were also a fair number of the frontline workers, the people who didn't have childcare when the schools closed, making the connections to what the impact would be. I think we described the people that were really at the heart of our mission were the people that were going to be, and we talk about disproportionately being impacted by poverty in our region, female heads of households, but were also then the added layer of the pandemic disproportionately impacting them. So we actually, unfortunately, had took more than one hit on that to the group that we serve. And we definitely tried to educate our donors about that, and so that they can make the connection there and understand that the need would really even be greater at this time. More on a broader scale, we look at, I think what I find with female donors and what they're interested in with our causes is related to opportunities for women and for girls. They understand that opportunities in the past, while they continue to grow for women and girls, were limited. And so that resonates and it connects, and they see the potential and they understand what a mentor did for them or what a door opening and an opportunity was for them. And they really see the power of that and connect that to their own experience. So for me, those causes are uniquely rooted in what their own experience was in terms of opportunities, but it's definitely related to providing opportunities for other women and girls.
I'd love to just follow up on that. You know, we see a level of empathy, and it doesn't mean that these women donors have walked exactly in the same shoes, but there is an alliance, an allegiance, almost like they're allies against the fight. And often these are women, and you know what, again, we should not make assumptions about somebody who now in their full-grown professional role is doing very, very well, running a business, having an enormous amount of impact in philanthropy, didn't start off struggling or in a family that struggled. And I often hear when somebody is really excited about the crisis nursery or one of our shelters or the work that we're doing in teen court, tells a story of their own background. And this is true for men as well. And often it's not a story that they tell very many people. I have donors who will say, I lived with my mother in a homeless shelter, and you would never, ever, ever expect that. So there's an empathy, and there also is obviously anything, as Moran said, is a barrier for women, where these women have had tremendous opportunities if they see barriers for other women, women who can't get to work because they don't have childcare. The nursery may really resonate with them. Women who they see as victims of domestic violence who can't leave a alleged perpetrator, because that's also their childcare provider. So, you know, we do see empathy, we do see connections and alignments and allegiances, and it is a smaller world than we think. And those who have and those who have not are not so far apart many times.
I will agree and say that again, it gets back to listening and not assuming again that men aren't going to care about a particular cause because it helps women. I have a friend who says, you know, if you have a mother or you know a mother, you might care about this. That this is in again with our Women's Giving Initiative that we have men who have said, I'd really like to support this as well. And of course, absolutely. So it's really listening to people. It's understanding what their motivation is. It's, you know, Elaine does a wonderful job with how she tells stories. It's telling those stories. It's making sure that you're able to communicate impact, because that's why our donors are giving. They want to make a difference. And so we need to make sure that we're sharing with them how they are impacting, you know, our community in a better way.
You know, and that is probably a really good transition into our next question, because suppose you do have a traditionally female focused cause within your organization, how do you then engage male donors to support that cause? Like, how do you turn that around and sort of flip the equation around for a moment? And Gretchen, I know you mentioned, you know, how many men will feel just as passionate about some of these causes as women. I'd love to get some other perspectives on here as well. Maran, could you weigh in on this question about how you might engage male donors in some of your causes?
Yeah, and this has been a unique discussion for the board of the Women's Foundation, for the organization as a whole. You know, it was established in 1994, so we just celebrated our 25th anniversary. And, you know, and similar to Gretchen talking about the scholarship fund at MCC, it was born out of women trying to seek impact and develop philanthropy in a space at that time where there wasn't as much strength or, real estate for them. And now that while that's grown, what's really interesting for our organization is, you know, the idea that we want to engage the male donor. We certainly don't want events that we hold that might be more female focused to be exclusive and not to be inclusive of our male supporters, which we have many. And I have board members who've talked a great deal about how will we look for our board to be inclusive? Will we encourage male membership on our board at some point? Specifically because if you're looking at female single household, plenty of these moms, these parents have had boys. They don't only have daughters. And so their empathy, going back to what we were talking about before about people's ability to connect to that universal human feeling and experience that they might have shared with the stories of the people that we support now, really resonates across gender and across age and lifespan, right? We can all connect to different times in our lives. And so that goes back to the listening, back to the relationships, and really understanding that we're human. So when I talk to a donor about what we're doing, I might share the data that we know, or the impact that we know this group that we serve is worse than, it's more harmful than it might be to another group. But I'm still talking to a person that I'm hoping is just going to be interested in that cause and where's their emotions lie. The man is a person on the other end of the discussion, just like a woman. And so I feel like you're just trying to find the connection that you would find with any donor, ultimately.
Nick, may I offer some thoughts? One of the things that used to be, I noticed this change. We run Fashion Week and we have an enormous amount of support. In the old days, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was much more conversation about return on investment. What's in it for me? Why would I want to support that? And I don't hear that nearly as much, hardly at all. And I don't know whether it's a shift in the human condition and a sense of us sort of all living together. And, there is something about the leveling of a playing field during a health crisis, for example. Even though we know that minority populations and those at risk are more vulnerable, we do see a level playing field in some ways when it comes to health. But there has not been that focus on, from male donors, as there used to be, even corporate donors, sort of what's in it for me? What am I going to get? I mean, obviously they like tickets and some fun things, but there isn't so much. And I think a lot of it has to do with the gentleness of the human condition and people saying, I want to help. And for some people, the treasure, which is their dollars, are their ways to help. They may not be able to volunteer and hold a baby. They may not be able to do some other things, but they do find it's important and meaningful. And I always say that when a man becomes a grandpa and his daughter or daughter-in-law has a childcare issue, they all of a sudden realize how devastating the lack of childcare can be, especially if they have to take over. But seriously, I do think we're seeing more and more and more gender equity coming into the hearts and soul. I have some board members, when I tell a story, and thank you, Gretchen, I am a storyteller, and I was telling a story about a young woman who was separated from her baby because we couldn't take the baby, we couldn't take the mom into the shelter. We took the baby and we separated the mom and the baby. And I looked over and there was a man with tears running down his face. The idea of that was so horrifying to him. So again, we mustn't assume, we mustn't think that men are all about business. They have soft spots. And we find at the center more and more and more gifts coming from male leaders of large corporations as well. So there's room for everybody at the table, the giving table.
And for the, for our last topic, I think it's a really good way to sort of sum things up, to talk about women as leaders. And I mean, we're very privileged to be able to learn from 3 women leaders in our nonprofit community today. So I'll just pose the question. I mean, what challenges are women leaders like yourselves facing today? It could really be anything. But what would you say, in your experiences, are some of the biggest challenges? And Gretchen, how about we start with you?
Sure. Well, I think that anybody in the nonprofit space is definitely going to talk about how we tend to need to do more with less. So that is probably always going to be the first thing that comes to mind. As Elaine pointed out, that we also, we have a lot of women who are leaders in this space, and there's a time in their life where childcare and other challenges are certainly something that's part of the stressors of a professional career. And I think that one of the best things that we can do in terms of developing leaders in nonprofits and fundraising is that networking, that mentorship, that giving people opportunities to grow and to expand their knowledge base, because I think that it's really clear the role that nonprofits play in our community is so important, and to have excellent leadership is vital.
I think I'll build a little bit on the excellent leadership idea, but also the bullet point that's on the slide, which is really the lack of diversity in that space with leadership. And so, looking at, when you look across, like even right now, as our board looks at redefining our job description and looking at how we're really looking at anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our function as a board and as an organization. One of the things that was kind of really obvious was that so many of the resources that we were supporting for board development and education were still coming from white voices, non-color voices. And so even when you're trying to educate yourself and notify yourself of things, really understanding that we're stronger when we're more diverse, we're more knowledgeable when we're more diverse, and how do we create that space? And that goes back to what one of the first slides was to talk about, that networking. How do you develop those relationships? I mean, inclusivity and understanding that, to me, those are the spaces where you're going to develop a much stronger board, or you're going to develop stronger skills yourself as an individual. I love what Gretchen said about the sounding board. We're lucky here in town that we have, the Council of Agency Executives during the pandemic. For me, I know in our organization, it's been a great resource. It's a very affordable resource for nonprofits, which do have to do a lot more with less. And I agree with Gretchen that the obligation, and I mean that in the best sense, to mentor, to be supportive, and to share the information, and to be generous with each other is really, really important for the whole community to succeed.
So, Gretchen and Moran are brilliant, and so thank you for that setup. We need moral leadership, and I think that's one of the things we don't talk very much about. There's lots of people who think they would just love so much to work in the not-for-profit sector, because it means at the end of the day you feel like you've done something really important, and of course we do feel that way. But we also have real down-to-earth, excuse my clock, down-to-earth business obligations as well, and moral leadership. At the Center for Youth, I will tell you, we're working every day in a strategic initiative to develop what we call a beloved community, and that beloved community is based on the teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. It was a strategic initiative that we introduced in November and December of 2019. It was way before there were all these multiple crises and the sorrow that we felt. The not-for-profit communities right now, certainly in the midst of this year of disruption, are even more important in terms of being good stewards, meeting an obligation, being very, very careful about the way we spend very, very scarce dollars. How do we take advantage of and then also honor even federal dollars that may come to us at not-for-profits? That needs a savvy, it means an astuteness. It's not just feel good. And I think that a lot of times, so, I was a corporate tax lawyer and left to go to the Center for Youth, and people thought, oh my goodness, what a great job. And it is a great job. It's very, very hard to say anything except the most positive, but it's hard work. And, I remember saying to my husband, don't worry, I'll be home by 5. I won't have those long hours. Not so. Not so. The not-for-profit world and the leadership that we have right now will tell you a not-for-profit job will take every single minute of your day. There's never enough time at the end of the day. Your work is not done. It's not that much different than a hard-hitting corporate position. But on the other hand, we have the most dedicated not-for-profit leaders in this community, and we support each other. But I do really think that the resources that we get from the generous people, many of them may be watching this call, are so accepted with such deep gratitude. I think that we can't say thank you enough. We know that people believe in us, they stand by us, they support us, they count on us. I have people who call me and say, what should I do? Who should I give to? They're asking us for advice, and we know each other well enough to give them good advice. So the not-for-profit world right now is also contributing an enormous amount to the economic energy. If you put us all together, we take up a huge portion of our economic sector here in our community. But understand that it's hard work. It is joyful work. It is work of the heart and soul. And the beloved community that we're creating at the Center for Youth is actually partially being created by our donors as well. So we welcome others in the not-for-profit space to learn about us and hear about us. But it is not, it's not for the faint of heart. Let me just say that.
I think that's true. And I also want to just add, because we have been talking quite a bit about people working in the fundraising field. And so I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, again, the role of the Association of Fundraising Professionals right now, again, during the pandemic. Everything has changed for fundraisers, and we are all bouncing ideas off each other and finding our way in how are we going to continue to serve our mission and be sensitive to the changes that our donors are experiencing. How to be bold, but not too bold is so very important. But then also the people who volunteer and who donate, who bring their talents to our organizations that we don't have the opportunity to possess internally is so important. It's a way for us to stay connected to community, to understand what the needs are going to be, and to help us connect really with other organizations as well. There's so many terrific volunteer leaders that help really build community here in the Rochester area.
Yeah, and I think just to keep adding to the discussion about relationships and mentors, we were discussing this in advance of the webinar about the pandemic not being, anybody's fault, right? It's not one organization's fault, it's not one leader's fault, but when you do have resources like the local chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals or the Council of Agency Executives, or you have existing relationships with other nonprofits and other nonprofit leaders, you're stronger together. And we have to understand that to be resilient with this, whether it's with our donors, letting them understand how we're, one of the bullets on here is this idea of dealing with the lack of resources during, not only a lack of staffing, but maybe a time of crisis where the funding resources are really limited. We all know that nonprofits are really challenged by the fundraising seasons that are and are not happening and how they're happening differently. And that goes right back to the idea that if you need a network of people that you can support, that you can rely on for confidential and professional advice, for really strong diplomatic and dynamic solutions, and looking for peers that you can support, especially in the nonprofit sector. I mean, Elaine's part of a much larger organization than I am, and Gretchen is she's a micro group inside a much larger organization, but you need to make sure you've got your sounding boards and you've got your resources around to help you weather, the legitimate storms that come up, including, the challenges of your own employees.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think that's really good information. I heard in there a few times the word mentorship. So I'm going to give you all a chance to be a virtual mentor right now to some of our listeners, to maybe some of our younger listeners who want to learn from you. What advice do you have for women striving to become future leaders in the nonprofit community? Elaine, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you. Well, there's a number of things. Obviously, we're talking about board and board involvements. At the Center for Youth, for example, we have a large board, 30 people on our board, 2 of them young people, 16 to 18. We also have a 25-member associate board. And this is a wonderful group of young professionals, mostly between 20 and 40 years old, who are new to the profession, getting started, wanting to hear more. Some of them are coming from the United Way's ALDP program or HLDP program and really connecting for the first time with a not-for-profit as a board member. And that is their way of really getting to know us. And it ends up being a chance for them to know an organization, but also to understand the workings of a board. If you have a chance to join or to find that kind of entity, I think that makes a great first step. The other thing is that all of us, and I feel particularly honored to have been an Athena winner, part of the role of the Athena Award was really to look at the impact you have on women. And one of the things I remember over my whole life, I'm older than the rest of you folks, I didn't have a lot of female mentors because I was of an age when everyone around me were males, particularly in my other careers. My obligation to my staff members at the Center for Youth and my young board members is fierce for me. I have to, obviously I have a daughter, I have nieces, I have others, but we have to, granddaughter, we have to be able to look at our own staff and then have a chance. For the women who are listening, the young professionals, find something that resonates with your heart and your soul. Sometimes your day job is a really hard-hitting, fast-moving, and it doesn't give you the joy because it's that kind of work. But it doesn't mean that you can't round out your life by doing some other things. And I'll tell you, ask, and I've had women, young women I don't know well, say, can I shadow you? Can I hang out with you? Can I come to something that you're at? Can I listen to you? Can I work for you? And the answer is mostly, yeah, sure. Not always. Sometimes it gets, a little stalky-ish, but no, just teasing. Sorry, Nick. But, I think obviously I was also city councilwoman for 12 years. So I had a lot of public persona, and that goes a long way as well. But I think we have an obligation, and I know my friends Gretchen and Moran feel their obligation because they're great leaders as well. We didn't get here by ourselves. And nobody gets there by themselves. I don't care how resilient, how smart. I mean, I have 2 masters, a law degree, and a PhD. I still didn't get here by myself. People believed in me and gave me a chance, and it's our obligation. So I would say young professional women in particular, do not be shy. Be gracious, but reach out, find an organization or a person or an initiative that speaks to your heart and soul, and take that step. Don't be afraid.
I would agree. You need to identify somebody that you admire, somebody that their work ethic, how they conduct themselves, how they operate in the community that you aspire to. And I think also doing your own, really self-reflection about where your skill sets are, because sometimes I think that it can end up being pigeonholed in a particular aspect of a job if you in fact do not have experience in other areas. So for example, being in the finance team, or you're not, planned giving, things of this nature that maybe aren't part of your day-to-day. You need to volunteer on a committee, you need to join a board, and figure out ways that you can round it out if you're not able to fully explore those skills in your employment.
And there are committee opportunities. Lots of boards have committees that you don't have to be a board member to serve on. For example, the Women's Foundation, we have an investment committee, we have a governance committee, and we have a finance committee, and all of them include community members. So that, you can, you need to be a legitimate attending those meetings and stuff like that, but you can dip your toe in and find out what you're thinking like and spend a year or two on a committee and see if it's something that's of interest to you. And I think Gretchen's absolutely right. You can do it two different ways. You can round out skills, you can complement skills, you can even strengthen existing skills because you're getting it from a different perspective with an organization, adding to your level of responsibility. But I do think your expertise and your passion and your commitment are needed in the nonprofit sector. We need those community members. They do a really great service to organizations by being outside of the organization. They offer perspective, balance, and an important insight that sometimes when you're eyeball deep in your organization, you can't see above your own paperwork, right? So there's ways to really think about your seat at the table. And I really encourage people to assume that you belong. Assume that there's a space for you and ask about that or find out about it. Instead of thinking that you have to wait to be invited, seek the opportunity. And very often, even if there's a process for a nonprofit organization to onboard board members or committee members, your initiative is really going to be, just like it is in most things in your life, is going to be a key factor to differentiate you and see your commitment to the organization, particularly as the bullets on the slide are pointing out, but also Gretchen and Elaine mentioned, if you have a passion for the organization's mission.
This is really great information. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go back and listen to the replay of this and write down all these little sound bites that you all had. And I don't know, it's inspiring to just think about it that way. So thank you for sharing all of your experiences. Thank you for all the great information. I know that we've given our listeners some good takeaways to take back to their organizations. So thank you again for being on this call and just sharing. And here's the contact information for all of our presenters. I know having resources out there for a topic like this is very helpful. So our presenters today just wanted to let everyone know out there that if they have any questions or just wanted to learn more about their organizations, they should feel free to reach out. And those organizations, again, are the Women's Foundation of Genesee Valley, the Center for Youth, and the Monroe Community College Foundation. And also, please feel free to reach out to Manning the Peer. I just think we have a ton of good resources out right now that really hit on a number of good topics. There's certainly specialized topics like this, like women in philanthropy, but also topics on the economy, topics on the pandemic. I'm sure lots of stuff that you might find helpful. So please feel free to join our mailing list, download a copy of our latest publication called Impact, or just reach out and ask a question. We'd love to hear from you. And then as a final reminder, you can submit questions through Zoom's question dialog box. So please feel free to do that now. We did have a few pre-submitted questions, so I think we have time to go over at least a few. There were a few questions related, which I think are a little more timely, a few questions related to the pandemic and sort of fundraising that's particular to here and now with all the challenges that many donors might be facing financially. So I guess I'll throw out this question to all of you. What do you think are the best approaches for fundraising today, given what's happening in the world? And this can be really broad or really specific. Any advice you have for today, something that'll help organizations see through these difficult times today.
I'll go. I can tell you what we've been doing, and then in a few years I'll tell you if that was right. but what we've really concentrated on is reaching out to our donors, to learning from them, sharing with them how we're impacted. But it's with the risk of stating the obvious, we're not the only ones in this, and so really trying to make sure that they understand that this is a partnership, and if their situation has changed right now, we absolutely understand. And so just really having these conversations and making sure that we're having those connections, because there are people who are in a position to help out maybe more than they were initially planning to before this. And there are needs that, 6 months ago we weren't aware of. So if we're not having these conversations, we're definitely going to be missing opportunities.
Let me just say exactly Gretchen's point about keeping in communication and not going silent. A lot of things, particularly in March and April, I think people were so confused and maybe so scared that we just went silent. And my experience was that some of our donors, particularly our older high-end donors who maybe were alone or didn't, were kind of counting on us for a gala or an event or something, were really lonely. And we went dark and we went, gentle, and oh my gosh, they don't have money, we shouldn't be asking. But we forgot to ask them how they were doing. And so I began to actually reach out, saying much more on a personal level. And I would identify 2 to 5 people every morning, and I would send emails. And some of them said, I'm really okay, and I don't know what I can do, but let me send you, 20% of what I think I can do down the road right now. And so checks came in, and that was not my intention. It tells you that loyalty, but more than anything, staying connected. And we make assumptions that people don't want to hear from us. In fact, they wanted to hear more. We're going to be doing another newsletter soon. The other thing, of course, is at the center, we had some crisis housing and some needs that we needed food, and we needed a lot of crisis work. Our shelters didn't close and the world around us did. So there were a lot of people who stepped up to bring food and provisions and supplies. And, we have something like 1,500 masks now, which I guess we'll be wearing for however long. But, don't go silent on people. Don't go away. Stay connected. And I think that was the key message I heard. And actually, it gave people the opportunity. And the market didn't hurt everybody. We were all so worried about that. But there are a lot of people who said, I'm still good. I'm okay. I'm going to meet my commitment. And monies did come in. So, yeah.
My thoughts are similar. I think a big part of it being the structure and your normal calendar and kind of the ebb and flow of how we communicate. We postponed, speaking to our own experience right now as a Women's Foundation, we postponed our in-person fundraiser. And when we did hold it in early June, I was particularly humbled by the engagement level that we received and the success of the event. It speaks to the fact that people are still human. They need their connections, that you provide meaning to their lives in the work that we do as a community. And I think Elaine's right. I think most of the organizations were a little overwhelmed. We were dealing with crisis management from an organizational standpoint, a sustainability financially standpoint for organizations. We're usually a little bit understaffed anyway. So there was this hesitancy to kind of curl up a little bit, just like, lay low. And I think that most organizations would argue that was that in retrospect, that was a mistake. And I think the data where it bears out that if you keep reaching out. So for me, we started focusing on communication about who we knew would be impacted with the pandemic, specifically how our work would be impacted. The other thing I think that's really important with the particularly personal relationships you might have with higher level donors who may make larger gifts is the transparency on your financial reality and connecting to that in a meaningful and concise manner so they understand how you're going to manage and what their gift might mean this year versus others, because it may save the day, whereas in other years it might only be a smaller piece of the pie. Those are important things to share if you have that kind of a relationship and the capacity to do that with a particular donor. I think it's meaningful. People are trying to be relevant right now, and I think that's the opportunity that you give your donor. So for me, it was a little bit more about bouncing back to our structure as an organization and how we were communicating routinely and trying to get back to that, so that we weren't leaving our people wondering what we were doing, or as Elaine said, not really understanding that we also needed to think about our donors and the community and our volunteers and what their needs might be emotionally and to connect with.
One more question that's come in here. What do you see as similarities and differences between men and women and their approaches to estate commitments and other planned gifts? Gretchen, can we start with you on that question?
Sure. I think that it kind of goes back to where we started about how increasingly the data in this area tells us that that women play a big role in this decision making. And I think also, to Elaine's point, that over time, how we communicate with women and the expectations around that have evolved. And so this is again about listening, about respect, about integrity, to be able to have people have confidence that they are going to be making a legacy gift that is going to have an impact, but definitely including women in the conversation.
So Nick, many years ago, I was involved with an initiative called Willpower. And Willpower was really an estate giving kind of plan giving initiative that came out of a group of people. I was actually practicing law at the time. And it was a way for us to send a message of actually the power of your will. And what I found is that increasingly women donors, women philanthropists had very good relationships with their lawyers, their estate lawyers, and their plan giving. And they had very good relationships with their financial planners. And as we introduced the concept of willpower to those professional service providers, lawyers, accountants, financial planners, women were very excited about using their will and the power of their will for exactly what Gretchen said, a legacy gift, a remembrance, a thoughtfulness. And that, I would love to see us bring that back, by the way. I don't know if other people know about it, but it was really a powerful message, and it really relied on, again, a partnership with not-for-profits. And I mean, I happen to be a lawyer on the other side, but you know, we saw places where people wanted to know more and do more with their own plan giving and the many options that they have. And so, for example, at the center, we have a fairly significant endowment for a small organization. Well, we're 10 million, so we're not so small, but we're not big. But we have a great endowment, and many of our donors are giving into that endowment through their willpower. And I love the fact that women like to they're reclaiming their power, and that's another way to do it. So I think it's a very significant topic.
I think it's, to Elaine's point, education, even to much younger people, making sure that they're aware of the idea that at some point there are mechanisms. There's so many different tools right now that you can do related to plan giving and estates. And we've been the very fortunate recipients of estate bequests that we typically put right into our endowment, similar to what Elaine was just describing. And it really does foster the growth of our endowed funds, which actually really support our grant making. So year after year, your investment leverages hundreds of thousands, if not millions more in funding. And that's money with feet. That's money that's running. That's that money that's working, and it's working for your donor, and it's working for the organization. So I think it's important when you are talking about the potential for it. And you know, I know Elaine mentioned, we did discuss before, and I think she's right about the fact that people they're not searching for that return on investment anymore as a donor. There's much more of a generosity and a charitable approach to corporate philanthropy as well as personal. But particularly when you're looking at endowed funds and supporting endowed funds, and you know, and I know that the foundation, the MCC Foundation's fund, I think is an interest earning. You know, it's a fund that does work in addition to just getting donations. That's money that will grow and expand, and that you're part of something that is much larger. And so I do think there's real assets to talking to people about that. If that's where their interests lie, then even if they're a much younger donor, you might say, oh, you know what, in the future, you might want to think about this, because this is really where you're going to see your money have a legacy and have a future. Just thinking about the assets. And again, back to the relationship idea, where that donor's interest lies.
Yeah, it's a cultivation that happens over a long time. Yeah. That's all we have. You know, there's no other questions right now. So everyone, thank you so much for the information that you provided, for your time, for your experience. I think this has been a great success. We love to hear from all of you. So I guess I'll just leave it as saying, again, thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners and attendees. And again, there will be a replay of this available soon. So if at any point you miss something or you want to send this to other colleagues, please do so. But thank you for everyone for taking the time today.
And thank you to the team of Manny and Napier. You guys are awesome, great organizers. And thank you, Nick and Amy and Annie and the whole team. Thank you all so much. God bless you guys. Take care.
Yep,
Thanks,
one of our favorite topics to talk about. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for the opportunity. The Manning and Napier team has been great, and we really appreciate it.
Great. And the sun came out while we were on the Zoom. So how
So
about
there you go.
There you
Our
go.
work here is done.
Take care. Be safe.
Bye-bye,
Be
everybody.
healthy.
Bye bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.